Notice, this meeting will be held in accordance with California Government Code Section 59453, subdivision of the Ralph M. Brown Act, California Government Code Section 54950, Series Resolution Number 2022-21, and the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act. Zoom information was on the posted agenda. Remote public comment is also available for the City Council meeting by emailing the City Clerk at cityclerk@ciseries.ca.us before 4 p.m. the day of the meeting. Include the agenda item number or public comment period in the subject line of the email. The clerk may read written comments onto the record if specifically requested to do so at the beginning of your email. Your written comment will be distributed to the City Council and kept on file as part of the official record of the council meeting. If you have any questions on how to attend virtually or encountering difficulties connecting to the meeting, please contact the City Clerk at 209-646-4812 or by email. And I welcome everybody to a special City Council meeting today, Wednesday, May 4th, 2022. I now call this meeting to order. Can we please get the roll call?
Here.
But we can't hear.
Annabelle, your mic is muted.
All right.
Try that one more time.
Councilmember District 1, James Casey.
Here.
Councilmember District 2 is vacant. Councilmember District 4, Mike Klein.
Here.
Vice Mayor Brett Silvera.
Here.
Mayor Javier Lopez.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Note, just for the record, we will not be having a closed session tonight. Now moving on to citizens communication. While the City Council welcomes and encourages participation in the City Council meetings, adopted rules allow no more than 5 minutes. Resolution number 2007-106. Members of the public interested in addressing the City Council during the special meeting may address during the consideration of the item that has been described in the notice for special meeting in accordance with Government Code, Section 5494. Citizens are entitled to address the City Council on any agenda items subject to the 5-minute provision. Anyone wishing to address the City Council must adhere to the rules of decorum. The rules of decorum are posted outside the chambers. Okay, is there anybody in the dais that would like to make a comment during citizens communication?
Yes, we do have someone
Thank you.
here. Okay, go ahead.
Dave Prentice series. You know, I think you ought to just take this code book and tear it up and throw in one of the many piles along the roads. What I think you need to do, law enforcement needs to start cracking down on these vehicles, the pickups and the trailers that are not securing their loads. I'm tired of picking stuff out of the middle of the roads. A lot of them are just basically driving around until they find a place to dump them. And many of them are too lazy to even get off the road. They just stop in the middle of the road and dump it. Or if it falls off the back, they just keep right on going. We need, I'm constantly picking up screws and nails out of the roads, and I'm just a minimum, not very much of the roads. I'm traveling, I just ride 20 miles and I do this. Sunday was really bad. I was really picking up a lot of stuff out of the roads, and some of that stuff is too heavy for me anymore, but I still drag it out. There's a code that there's a law, and you know, I'm not even sure your app is working correctly. Twice I've posted for Graffiti. One, it took 3 weeks before they finally got it, and this last one, a week and a half, and it's not even saying if the thing's closed or not. Anyways, we need to do a better job. Thank you.
Good evening, council members. John Warren, District 1, City of Ceres. I have a question as to how this workshop is going to be conducted. I understand normally that private citizens get to address the council on matters that are not on the agenda for 5 minutes like I'm doing now. But The agenda is the code enforcement outline and plan. And I was wondering if we are going to be allowed as the citizens, and there's not very many of us here. I don't think there's very many online, if any at all, to address on a specific item as they're moving through the outline that was posted with the staff minutes.
So we will be having a presentation, and then we'll move on to council comments, and then we'll have public comments, and you can refer back to any line items after that.
Because it's broken down like illegal dumping strategy and street vendor strategy and graffiti park vandalism. I was wondering if each one of those titles, if one of us wanted to speak on the matter briefly, if we would be allowed.
You will be allowed after we have council make comments, and then we can go back to those items that you wish. Yes, you will have time.
Thank you. And
Problem.
thank you for coming to the
Memorial.
this morning. It was nice visiting with you out there.
It was great. Thank you. Any other members to have any other comments during citizens communications?
No more comments here.
Do we have anyone on Zoom?
There is currently no one that has raised their hand to speak.
I see somebody just walked in. Can you please check with that person to see if they have any comments or during citizens communications?
No comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Once again, we don't have anybody on Zoom, so we will go ahead and close citizens communications and move on to new business. New business code enforcement workshop for the presentation of information related to enforcement and to present a proposed plan to address code enforcement issues in the city. And Police Chief Rick Collins will be making this presentation. Chief?
Mr. Mayor, if I might, just
Absolutely, sir, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Before we hand it off to Chief Collins. So I think, Mayor, as you mentioned, the format this evening is intended as a workshop, although the Zoom format it doesn't really kind of show that, but we're intending this as a workshop, more of a conversation with the council on code enforcement. The chief was going to present a couple different things tonight. One's a slide deck with really what code enforcement is doing now, how code enforcement is approached currently. Then the second part of the presentation is the outline that was included with the agenda and the brief staff report. The outline really is in response to the desire of the council to have a proposal in front of you. We had the conversation with the council regarding use of ARPA funds. What we heard from the council was a desire for a plan. So the council could review a plan for code enforcement and the use of ARPA funds. So the other part of this evening is presenting to the council the outline and the thoughts that the staff has regarding the use of those ARPA funds and the future approach to code enforcement. So with that, with the pleasure of the council, I'll kick it over to the chief, and the chief will launch into his presentation. Thank you, Mayor and council.
Hey, Chief, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. If I could have the PowerPoint brought up, please. That's where I'll start.
You see it?
I do see it. Thank you, Christina. And like the city manager said, I'll go through the PowerPoint. It's rather lengthy. It has 24 slides. And then I'll move into the plan. After the plan, we'll seek input from the council and the public and take our direction from there. So I'll start with the slide. Next slide, please. So this slide covers the purpose of code enforcement, and that is the investigation of violations of Muni Code, state laws, regulating public health and safety, public welfare, public nuisances, business activities, consumer protection, property maintenance, standards, or zoning violations. When violations are verified, enforcement efforts will be applied in accordance with the City of Ceres municipal code, state laws, and federal laws. Next slide. This slide just covers our mission, and this is, excuse me, this is the mission statement that we have for all of the police department, and since code enforcement is under our umbrella, this is their mission statement as well. Next slide, please. Our approach to the community. The staff of code enforcement uses communication as a major key in working effectively with residents to produce positive outcomes in correcting violations in a timely manner, avoiding violation penalties and fees if possible. Remaining compliance focus is a very crucial part of the process when citing for violations. Officers have a clear understanding of the tools available to them and how to use them. Now, this is a question that's posed to the council. Do we shift from a compliance-focused mindset to a more enforcement-focused mindset? And we can talk about that later on at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. This is our current personnel. Missing from this is Captain Pat Crane and most recently Lieutenant Chris Perry, who oversee code enforcement. But we currently have 2 code enforcement officers, one starting as recently as March of this year, 1 code enforcement secretary, 2 part-time abandoned vehicle abatement officers, and 1 graffiti abatement contractor. This team of professionals works hand in hand daily to achieve our goals and provide an unwavering service to the public. Next slide, please. These are some of the hot button topics that are currently going on and have been a problem for some time, to include illegal dumps, blight, substandard housing, homeless camps, zoning violations, and street vendors. Next slide, please. Complaints and prioritization. We receive a wide variety of complaints from all citizens and city employees daily. These complaints are all processed with health and safety being the priority. Therefore, a complaint of an inhabited residence which contains suspected active mold is investigated first rather than a vehicle with expired registration sitting in the driveway. All complaints are investigated in a timely manner and are important to us because they are important to our citizens. We average approximately 96 new requests a month and approximately 35 new code enforcement cases a month that are investigated. Next slide, please. This just highlights the priority of the cases and how they're handled. Obviously, with immediate, those deal with substandard building, health and safety violations, immediate risk to public safety, down to the routine. Those are assigned to officers that are added to their cases. Those include public nuisance, blight, abandoned vehicles, illegal dumps, and vendors. And the lowest priority are shopping carts, prohibited signs, unpermitted garage sales, and waste wheelers. Next slide, please. The case process. We receive a complaint and review it for the violations. We do a history check on the premise. We investigate the complaint, contact a responsible, or visually verify violations. We do an inspection of the property or the business or the vacant lot, whatever the case may be. We collect evidence, photos if possible, if any violations are in plain view. The code enforcement officer then authors case notes with a report with details explaining each violation and the corrective measures for each violation. And then he or she authors a notice of violation to the owner or occupant of the property. Next slide. After 10 days, they do a re-inspection to determine if the violations were corrected. If they are corrected, the case is closed. If they're not corrected, an attempt to gain compliance through speaking with the responsible or issuance of an administrative citation. If cited, a notice or order to abate notice is sent to the owner or occupant and must come into compliance within 10 days. Re-inspection and issue an administrative citation if the violation still exists, and we repeat this process if it's necessary. This could take weeks, months, or years to complete depending on the severity of the violations and several other factors to include extensions, receiverships, probate cases, and or bank-owned properties. Next slide. This is just some visuals of a before and after. This was a residence on West Hackett Road that was a marijuana grow. And you can see from the before and after photos what it looked like when we came in contact with this property and what it looked like 3 months later after working with the property owners. As you can see, it's a lot of improvement just by working with the owners to get the place into compliance. Next slide, please. This is also a before and after a photo of a major dump site along Herndon Road. This was quite the eyesore and top priority for our city manager. He worked really hard to get this place cleaned up, and you can see the results of his tenacity. Next slide, please. The authority to inspect. This kind of gets a little hairy at times, but hopefully this slide will provide some clarification. A code enforcement officer is authorized to enter upon any property or premise to ascertain whether the provisions of the municipal code or applicable state codes are being obeyed, and to make any examinations or surveys as may be necessary in the performance of their duties. These may include the taking of photos, samples, or other physical evidence, such as the use of sound level measurement device to measure noise disturbance. This is where it gets tricky. If an owner, occupant, or agent or other responsible party refuses permission to enter or inspect, the code enforcement officer may seek an administrative inspection warrant pursuant to the procedures provided in the California Code of Civil Procedure. What this means in summation is we can go out and ask. If they tell us no, we have to walk away and get a warrant and come back at a later time. Next slide, please. This just highlights the administrative citation fines from the first time to the third time. And if we repeat that over and over again for health and safety code violations, the fines are a little bit steeper. Next slide, please. Illegal dumps. This is a hot button topic right now and has been for some time, but this is the procedure that we go through. We attempt to identify a responsible party of the illegal dump. If the responsible party cannot be identified, code enforcement will arrange for the removal of the dump by the city streets department or Bertolotti. This is on public property only. We utilize cameras, conduct surveillance in problem areas, and attempt to identify illegal dumping suspects. We speak to neighbors, witnesses, and solicit help from the citizens to assist in identifying the responsible subjects. And residents are allotted 2 free pickups a year from Bertolotti Disposable Services. Next slide. Homeless camps. Several years ago, a case out of Boise, Idaho came out named Martin versus Boise. And essentially it said, a municipality cannot criminalize such behavior consistently with the 8th Amendment when no sleeping space is practically available in any shelter. In their summary of the opinion, the judges wrote, as long as there is no option for sleeping indoors, the government cannot criminalize indigent homeless people for sleeping outdoors on public property on the false premise they had no choice in the matter. This does not give homeless person permission to commit other crimes while sleeping in public, i.e. trespassing, open alcoholic beverage containers, possession of stolen property, and so on. Next slide. And vacant lots, we have a lot of vacant lots in series, and where there's overgrown vegetation, fire hazards, illegal dumping, homeless encampments, blight. And in those cases, each property owner must be located and identified before anything can be done. A notice of violation is sent to the owner and the case is started. The property owner is responsible for the violations on their property. Next slide. What we don't do, we don't respond to emergency situations involving life-threatening matters. Code enforcement does not enter private property to correct violations unless we have a court order, i.e. an abatement warrant or receivership. They don't investigate or enforce civil matters. They don't investigate criminal cases or physically remove or clean up illegal dumps. Referred to the streets department or engineering department. I'm not sure why the engineering department is in there for that, but that could change at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. Continuing, we don't investigate complaints outside of the city limits, process illegal dumps for fingerprints or DNA, take any enforcement by seizing property, issuing citations, and imposing fines without due process. And code enforcement does not enforce CC&Rs, which is covenants, conditions, or restrictions, or HOA rules. And they do not enforce muni codes without due process. Next slide, please. These last few slides, I think Mr. Pratt alluded to this, the app. This is the app that is available to everybody that has a smartphone or a computer, where you can go in and submit complaints for various violations of muni code or other things that are city related through this app. And this is how you can help us. Helps us track and keep track of what's going on in the city and the problems that are happening that are code enforcement related. And the next few slides just goes through the different screenshots of that app. The final slide here of this presentation are all the contacts for the code enforcement team, to include the graffiti abatement number and the abandoned vehicle abatement unit hotline. And there's also a nice little link down there for our shopping cart retrieval service. At this point, I will move on to the outline. The Code Enforcement Unit Plan outline. The mission is to investigate violations of city municipal code and state laws regulating public health and safety, public welfare, public nuisances, business activities, consumer protection, property maintenance standards, and/or zoning violations. When violations are verified, enforcement efforts are applied in accordance with the city municipal code, state laws, and federal laws. The ultimate goal is gaining compliance. Staff is proposing, with the use of ARPA funds, 1 code enforcement working supervisor, a total of 3 code enforcement officers, 1 code enforcement secretary, and 2 part-time staff to deal with illegal dumpings. As we move down into the illegal dumping strategy, we would assign 2 part-time staff to handle that priority task. We have a pilot program going on currently as we speak. And I've noticed in the past couple of weeks, visually, the streets look a lot better now that we have people doing this 2 days a week to deal with the illegal dumps. This will be a proactive and reactive approach to this. Much like we do now, the legal dump is assigned to an officer and documented in government outreach. The site is inspected. We review camera footage if we have any available. And currently, I believe we have a 10-day notice of violation, meaning if we identify an illegal dump, we give them 10 days to clean it up. I would like to see us lessen that time to 3 to 5 days. If that were the case, code enforcement would inspect it after 3 to 4 days. If it was abated, the case is closed. If it's not abated, we issue a fine to the responsible party. The removal of the dump site by city staff or Bertolotti's disposal, depending on the size and scope of the dump. And we want to collaborate and communicate with Public Works to ensure consistency, efficiency, and teamwork in this effort. In conjunction with the above strategy, we would like to implement a robust camera monitoring system. We would place these conspicuous cameras at known hotspots throughout the city to eliminate and/or reduce the frequency of illegal dumps. We would create and place signage at the same locations as the cameras to include the muni code violations and a fine schedule. This is to let the community know that, number 1, they are being watched. Number 2, they are violating a muni code. And number 3, here are the fines associated if you so choose to continue to violate the code. We would like to create public service announcements and distribute those either through utility bills or our various social media platforms. And we would want to take a more assertive approach with the leaf and limb violators. Moving on to the street vendor strategy, continue to enforce and investigate with non-sworn staff, attempt to locate mid to high level employees who drop the vendors off. This has been a challenge for us. We've tried on a couple of investigations that we've done. These people are coming as far as Pittsburgh, California, down to Sirius to drop off vendors. Should we consider lowering their insurance policy requirement? It's currently set at $2 million. And we need to take a closer look at private property versus public property. I've been told that we get a lot of resistance and pushback from businesses like Home Depot and La Sequoia, who actually allow the vendors to sell on their properties. That could create problems in the long run, but we need to figure that out down the road. And we will issue citations to those who we've encountered before. They've been warned before. I'm not into continual warnings of the same people. We need to do things to change the behavior that is not within our standards. And we'll continue to work with those who we've not encountered before and issue them warnings on a case-by-case basis. As we move into the graffiti and park vandalism, again, with like the illegal dumps, we want to implement a robust and conspicuous camera monitoring system that experience the most problems. And these are going to be budget permitted. We'll try to get data to identify when the graffiti and vandalism occurs. That could actually lead into some police department enforcement as well. Coordinate with the Parks Department to ensure that there's proper communication and documentation between our contract vendor and code enforcement. Look at establishing on-call procedures for extremely offensive or large-scale graffiti on the weekends. Not too long ago, we had an issue arise at Strawberry Park where we had to get all hands on deck to clean up some very offensive stuff. On a smaller scale, code enforcement can deal with that. If it's a large scale thing, we need to think about having some on-call procedures to deal with those as those situations arise. Ideally, in a perfect world, we would like to assign one code enforcement officer to handle graffiti and vandalism in the parks because it is such a common occurrence, unfortunately. As we move on to homeless camping and RV, we need to get in touch with our local businesses to get them install the proper signage relating to loitering and trespassing. If we can do those things, that gives us the ability to go out and do a different type of enforcement because being homeless is not against the law. Daily, we get a report of shelter space that is in a county. If there is no shelter space available, we cannot cite. If there is shelter space available and they are refusing to go, that gives us the ability to cite as determined by Martin versus Boise. Camping in public places, I do need to make one little edit to this. Under item D, can we change this notice from 10 days to 5 days? That is not applicable. I confirmed today that regardless if somebody is camping in an RV or in a park, when we tag the place or the RV, they have 8 hours to move, and then we can go out and cite after that time has expired. We can continue to have the officers assist code enforcement by tagging RVs and parking lots open to the public. We are close to eliminating some towing issues that we've had with the towing companies on our rotation, and this will increase the efficiency when it comes to getting big RVs and campers out of public places. That is actually over at the city attorney's desk to have him look over the agreement. Once that is finalized, that will no longer be an issue. Can you move up to substandard housing, please? We've had a few of these take up quite a bit of our time, and we need to take a more active approach to this task. We need to engage early to gain compliance with use of violation notices, communication, and/or fines. If this approach does not work, we will have to resort to red tagging procedures or court order remedies. Either approach takes time, and we also want to have early engagement with our legal team to get advice to get the best product out there available and to bring resolution to the problem as quickly as we can. But it's been my experience and some others' experience that even at the quickest, once it gets into the court system, it still takes time. It's a process. Moving on to the work schedule. Do we stay on a 4-10 schedule or do we move to a staggered 5-8 schedule? The work schedule that we're proposing would infuse the part-time illegal dump crew into the code enforcement schedule based on data for illegal dumps if we have it. Code enforcement officers who currently work Saturdays would rotate every 3 months, so not one code enforcement officer is stuck working on Saturdays. And one question that we did have for council is there a need to transition to a 7-day work week coverage, meaning do we have code enforcement officers work on Sundays? The final thing I wanted to cover in this outline is work operations and efficiencies. We want to have MDCs installed in the code enforcement vehicles so they can do notes out in the field and via Surface Pros or laptops, iPads, some connected device that's portable that allows them to stay out in the field. Work in collaboration with the planning department, fire department, public works, and AVA. Communication between these departments is going to be essential to the overall mission. We need to identify what cases will take priority depending on who calls in a complaint or violation. And one thing we need to consider is implementing a beat assignment for the code enforcement officers like the police officers do. And what a beat assignment is officers are assigned to one geographic area of the city. We currently have 6. We would need to see if we could implement that in the code enforcement world as well, where one code enforcement officer would be responsible for one geographic area when he or she reports to work. And the last thing I wanted to cover is we need to develop some performance measures to track the effectiveness of the unit. And we can do that by seeing what other cities are using as performance measures, because one of the calls why we're here is council and the community wants to see an improvement in the code enforcement unit. And how do we measure that? And so we know that we are being effective. We're asking for a lot of money here today, and we want to be able to provide some sort of measure that says we are doing that or we aren't doing that. And lastly, some of you may have seen this already. We will provide council with a monthly activity report to show the unit's progress and performance. And in that monthly activity report, you will see it broken down by weeks. So there'll be 4 weeks across the top with a monthly total at the bottom. That concludes my presentation of the overview and the outline plan. I will turn it back over to the city manager to see if he has any more comments.
Thanks, Chief. Hopefully I'm not muted, but just if I might, Mayor and Council, I think the Chief said it at least once, and I think the word appears in a couple of the slides. Code enforcement is really a process from kind of an individual case level. It's a process, and sometimes the process takes much longer than we'd like. And then, you know, in the broader context on a community level, code enforcement is a process. And it will be a process that we will engage in. We will put, you know, our shoulder behind it, but it's a process, and we need to, I think, set reasonable expectations on the process, and understand that this process is not going to make changes overnight. I think we just need to have reasonable expectations as we enter the process. We do definitely want to understand how we will measure the success of the program. So we think it's important to establish those performance measures so we can understand what success looks like and be able to demonstrate to you and the council, you as the council and the community, that the success of the program, because this is potentially a significant investment. We do definitely want to know what the value of that investment is. So other comment the gentleman made on GoGov, at least from my experience, I will reiterate, I'll agree with the gentleman that we need to do better on GoGov. I reported a dump site on GoGov, asked the staff if it had been addressed. Bertolotti had indicated it had been picked up. I knew for a fact it hadn't been picked up because I picked up the dump site myself. So I threw it in the back of my truck. After driving by it for about a week and a half, I just couldn't take it anymore. So I threw it in the back of my truck, took it to the yard. So I know firsthand that we can do better on GoGov. So we definitely are going to look at that, fine tune that, and see what sort of tweaks we need to make to that system to make it better. But also, the chief referenced our pilot program for illegal dump sites. We've cleaned up about 120 sites in about the month we've been at it. About 20 today we cleaned up. So the experience we have in that pilot project, I think will help us as we move forward in developing what will hopefully be an ongoing program to help us address illegal dump sites. So that's all I had, I think, Mayor. And then I'll kick it back to, I think, you, Mayor, and the council.
With that, we'll start off with council questions. Council members.
I'll go first. This is Councilmember Silvera. You know, we've talked about this for a long time, and I just want to congratulate everybody involved. Chief Collins, Alex, Lieutenant Perry, Pat Crane. This is a great comprehensive plan that you've obviously put some time and effort into. Hopefully the resources that we're allotting to that and improving for that is going to give you the tools to try this. It's going to be new. No doubt in my mind, you guys will be great at it. The evaluation and process and communicating to us how it's working will be great. The things about hours and all that, in my opinion, I'm going to let you guys, the professionals at code enforcement, figure out what's best with that. I think Chief Collins and Lieutenant Perry and Captain Crane are well versed in what's necessary for hours and overlapping schedules and all that. I just, again, want to congratulate all of you for having something that we've been waiting for and for doing such a fantastic and clear and concise job at this plan. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other hand, Councilmember Klein?
Yeah, well, first off, I want to start this off by saying, Chief Collins, thank you very much. The slide presentation, being on the city council for over 9 years, that code enforcement has went to 3 different departments. And it fell on your lap about, 4 years ago or so. And, we had Sergeant Cooley in it. And until today, and I apologize, I should have known this, but I didn't know that Lieutenant Perry was in charge of code enforcement. But, I think we're going in the right direction with the open dialogue that we're having right now. But I wish, unless I missed something, I would have had the slide presentation ahead of time, because, I'm going to let the other council members speak first, because I do have a lot of questions and a lot of things that I'd like to find some more information about. So, I'd like to at least let Mr. Casey and the Mayor Lopez speak before I start asking my questions.
Councilmember Casey?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Chief, for the presentation. One of the things that kind of somehow or another we need to instill some pride into the city employees. We're going to have 4 or 5 code enforcement people, but the street cleaner, for instance, he drives around stuff I don't expect, I wouldn't expect him to do anything, but certainly he should be able to report that to his supervisor. Then that supervisor should be able to, direct it to the right people. I know when I met with, when I first came on the council, I met with the chief and the code enforcement and the ABA people, and they they stress the importance of following the procedure. This new way of contacting the city may be working better. And granted, Alex, this is a slow process, but it didn't happen overnight either. It's been ongoing, and the city council now and chief, you and Lieutenant Perry, all of us, yeah, maybe it occurred. It's been a slow process, but we need to make certain and improve on it. But it goes back again to the pride that the city employees need to take. I compliment what our Councilman Silvera said, that you guys are doing a good job now, but we need to continue to do that good job every day. It's a shame that the city manager and council people have to get involved in some of the cleanup, and that I know Alex and I, where I work, there's been debris on both sides of the street there on Fairview for probably a year. And because of the grand opening of the 7-Eleven store there at Whitmore and Blaker, Alex saw it firsthand. I reported on that series thing. He reported on series thing. So I don't know who had more influence, but the next day it was gone. But it was there for a year. Code enforcement people that we had, maybe they're not still here, drove by it 2 or 3 times a week. The street cleaner drove by it every time we went down the street. And stuff like that needs to be corrected. That's it. I'll let the mayor speak.
Thank you, council. I also agree with everyone else. It was a very impressive demonstration, and kudos to everybody involved. And yes, you're absolutely right. By measuring the data, we will be able to improve on this. I think this is the first stepping stone. And with that, I take it back to Mr. Klein.
And Mr. Mayor, if I might, I think
Oh, yeah, sure.
I think Councilmember Casey has more influence than I do.
Thank you, Alex. Councilmember Klein.
So if I can go back to the chief's slide presentation, I didn't write down the slide, but I think it's slide number 3 that says something about the violations, the month and things. Can you put his wherever, yeah, it said how many violations and what's been reported for the month? Keep on going there. I think it was the one previously where you said you had anyway, where you were getting 96 reports a month and that. So my question to that is Chief, who gets a copy of those violation reports? Does it just go to the code enforcement officer and code enforcement secretary, or does Lieutenant Perry get a copy of those too as they come in?
This is where Captain Crane and Lieutenant Perry may have to chime in, but if I understand correctly, they come into the secretary and the code enforcement officer.
Okay, so Lieutenant Perry, do you get a copy of those complaints as they come in?
Captain Crane, I'll take that one. We don't get copies of the complaints when they first come in. There's a 2-step process. When the complaint comes in on GoGov, the code enforcement officer will take that. The secretary will have it and make sure it kind of gets routed. There'll be a follow-up on that to verify. Let's use an example. It's a trash dump. So we get a trash dump. They'll go out to look at it. If it's been taken care of, then that call gets closed out in GoGov and it never makes it to the second tier, which is actually an actual case that they then follow up on. So the initial tier, we don't get anything on those. Once it makes it into it's an active case that they're working, we have weekly briefings. Lieutenant Perry and I meet with code enforcement on Wednesdays, and we get briefed on any of their open cases that they have going on at that time.
Okay, let's go to slide 8. Since I didn't have time to go over this thing, I do want to make a comment that I do like the way you guys, at least decipher and prioritize what's important and what should be, held to the utmost importance. I think that those things are in the right direction. And if anybody looks at that, I don't think they can really argue the point where, shopping carts, waste wheelers, garage sale signs is really a low priority compared to, blight, abandoned vehicles, illegal dumps. I think that you're going in the right direction as far as prioritizing them. So, I do like that being spelled out. Gives everybody a little bit better understanding. Slide 14. Okay, when it comes to these citations, my question to you is this per calendar year or is it year to date on the first violation?
Yeah, we've been treating this as a per calendar year.
So if they get a violation in July, come January of the following year, it starts over.
In theory, it could, but it would depend on what the violation was and what we were dealing with, the severity of it. If we're dealing with a minor violation, it could at that time start over. If we're dealing with a safety issue, dealing with a substandard housing, something that's a public safety hazard, we could extend that and call it a year from July and take it to the following July.
Okay, thank you. Slide 16. Homeless encampments, when it talks about, I was looking on the thing about private property. What about homeless encampments where they're in shopping centers, more so shopping centers?
If they're blocking doorways to the businesses that we've seen, they can't do that. We can move them along and it doesn't affect the Boise decision because they're impeding that entrance to that business. If they are behind a business and they're either blocking the road or anything along those lines, we can move them along. This case decision primarily dealt with parks, city parks. People were being removed from the parks with no place to go, and that's where this lawsuit came. We have no problems pushing people out of the shopping centers. It's not safe. I mean, if they're in the parking lot, they can get hit by a car. If they're by the doorways, they're blocking doorways to businesses and impeding that traffic.
So it's a determined basis of, because I see constantly right there off of Mitchell Road where the old blood bank was on the corner, right behind Barber's. There's constantly people there, but they're not blocking any entrance. They're not blocking anything, so I was just trying to find a definition of what it would be a priority. If the property management asks you to go in and remove them or talk to them, does that happen?
They can. If they posted in the parking lot that there's no trespassing, no loitering in there, then we can move them along. But that would be up to the private business that owns that parking lot and those businesses to go do that. Without that being posted, we can't go in there and just move them along for a trespassing because they haven't been trespassed. Now, I know what you're talking about, that one behind the car wash there. You're right, they're not blocking the sidewalk. We do go out there routinely to move them along and they come right back. We're walking a fine line here because being homeless is not a crime. So we're walking a fine line here trying to move them out of certain areas without infringing on their civil rights. So it's tough. It'd be helpful for us though. We get the shopping centers to actually post no loitering, no trespassing. Then we can have a lot more authority to go in there.
And don't get me wrong, I'm asking the question because I do agree with you. I have yet to call in to anybody about a homeless person, sleeping in those vicinity of the areas. But it's more of a clarification that I'm asking, because again, I have not called in one of those yet. And, you know, with it being, like you say, no blockage of the businesses and things, you know, it is a fine line, and I do have a compassionate heart on those things. So moving on to slide 20. Okay, so this is more for IT. I know there's been some issues on this in the past. IT, I talked to them about if the case gets closed, that would be wiped off the app, because, you know, when it's on your personal phone and you do this, it stays on there forever. So I guess, so to Alex and to Captain Crane and Lieutenant Perry, can you follow up with IT to find out if that issue has been taken care of?
We did reach out to the developer for the app and pose that question to them. And their response was that they have not come across that before, where somebody has had a lot of complaints that they're actually stacking up on their phone. There's no mechanism put in there to take those old complaints off. They did say that they would look into it, and maybe in a future update, they would have that ability. But what they told us is that the app's not designed to wipe out the old complaints.
Well, and maybe I'll follow up with IT, because, you know, about a month ago, he told me that they were working with the developer to update that app. So I didn't know if you had heard anything or not.
Yeah, we reached out to the developer itself, and because IT, they didn't develop this, they don't have the ability to do that. So they were kind of piggybacking with us. Unless they're having other talks, then I'm not aware of those.
Okay. Now I'd like to go back to what the council agenda was part of the agenda report, would be on tonight's agenda. And I want to go to illegal dumps, which would be illegal dumps. And I have a question for, I believe it's F, the removal of dump sites by city staff or borough lottie. If we determine who the violators are, can we issue them a fine if we clean it up, or bill them for us cleaning it up?
Yes. The problem with it, though, is when we get these leaf and limb dumps, and I'm assuming you're talking about the leaf and limb, because what we get primarily, or just any dump?
Just any dump in general.
Right? If it's a trash dump, then yes, if we can identify who the responsible is, then yes, we can go straight to a citation on that route.
Okay. The next question I have is street vendors. You know, this would be more for the city manager and the city attorney. You know, I'm open to look at insurance policy, what's required, as long as it does not hold the city any kind of liability. You know, to make it so some of these street vendors, not that I really want them, but they're here. But I also want them to meet what the city's, you know, municipal code calls for. So, you know, I'd like to see where we could go with it as far as the insurance policy. And the other thing is can we find a business like Home Depot or La Sequoia that allows these street vendors here that are not in compliance with the city municipal code? You know, I read the other day that the Stanislaus County cited the resident on Faith Home and Whitmore for allowing the street vendor to set up shop and sell their goods. Come to find out that he was charging them rent space for being there. And, you know, for the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've drove out that way and I've not seen another vendor out there. So can we find the business owners that allow this?
Councilmember Klein, I'll look further into our municipal code and provide you with an answer at a later date.
Okay, you already answered another question I had, was that the county gives you an update daily of available bed space. That was another one. when you say you're close to eliminating the towing service issue, does that mean, we do this rotation? Are we going out to, or is the city going out to bid for towing service for larger vehicles like that?
No, we're not going out to bid. They have an agreement to handle the larger vehicles amongst themselves. And that satisfies our desires and our needs. So we're not going out to bid for that.
Okay. I do like like I say, we're going in the right direction. I do like the thing that, you're looking at how to do a performance measure with code enforcement to see we're going on the right track. It's been an eyesore, and it's been a council thing for 5 or 6 years on this stuff. I like the idea of considering implementing beat assignments for code enforcement. I would like to see code enforcement on, a 5, 8 hour, 7 days a week until we get everything under control. I commend Lieutenant Perry for taking on this assignment, because I know that it's a big undertaking, because a lot of us do not know code enforcement. It's a learning process for all of us. So I do thank Lieutenant Perry for that. Right now, I'm not in favor for a working supervisor. I'd like to get a grasp on what we have now and the direction we're going before we do that. And I'd like to see some kind of little report on what, and you brought this up, Chief, of what the other cities are struggling with code enforcement and how they're implementing things. I know every city's got it. There's a lot of cities that have worse homeless encampments than we do, but they also have illegal dumps and graffiti. So I'd like to see how they're implementing and what they have in place to do it. So with that, I would like to thank you for the time and letting me ask my questions and bring you some of my opinions. And again, Chief, Captain Crane, Lieutenant Perry, I think we're going in the right direction, and I thank you very much. And
Thank you,
Alex,
Captain.
and Alex, I also want to thank you for getting this thing started.
Thank you very much. Alex, unless you have some input, I want to take this back to the public.
Nothing at this point, Mayor.
Okay, sounds good. Christina, if you could start off with the public members that have some comments and questions.
Dave Pratt of series. I only got 2 on the app. It seems like all my apps, every time they get updated, they get dumber. And I feel that's the same way with your app. I get a message right away when I post something that they'll contact me in 4 to 5 days about the issue. They don't do that. They used to send me a notice that the issue is taken care of and it's closed. Well, they don't do that anymore either. So I'm not even sure. So I don't know how that's working, but it's not. I've looked back on a lot of my old cases. I know I've even written a note on them that I've seen they took care of the issue and they're closed, but they're still open. So the app's not working. The other issues on the homeless. You're still under the same impression that you're going to push them into somebody else's area. You're not taking care of the issues. You got at Turlock had big write-ups about them taking care of the homeless, getting them out of the areas. I just drive up and down the freeways and around there, I see the same camps everywhere. You're not dealing with the issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next person.
Sit down. Gene Akeley series. Well, there's so many things to cover. I want to thank you for everyone that's finally got involved after all these years. I think Mike Klein explained that in his short explanations. I think the departments need to be addressed somewhere from the city. So the different departments, whether they're in the parks or street maintenance or whatever, anybody that works outside, they should be indoctrinated to, if, like, we go back to Chief Collins, if you see something, say something. But evidently through the years, there's a lot of people who don't say something because they think they don't see something, I guess, I don't know. And the weekends for code enforcement, I think code enforcement should go to 7 days a week and maybe keep it that way for several years until you might see an improvement. Because a lot of stuff happens on weekends, you know, even on Sundays. Sunday night, or Saturday night, down on Blaker, they were selling food at 8:45 in the evening, and I saw a car pull over and get something to eat. Another big party was in town too on another street, and the peddlers were down there selling stuff. So, and what happens after hours, when code enforcement goes home, does the police department get involved in these issues? I don't know, because evidently they did something similar in the past, but then that was thrown to the side and only code enforcement would take care of that. I'd like to know too, these people that come in from out of the county to drop off these vendors, are any of these people being caught? And again, I go back to Mr. Varney telling me about a year ago that there was an investigation going on about human trafficking. Why don't the people in the city know about that? Like the citizens know that some of these people might be trafficked to enslave them in a job to pay them back for possibly coming over on the United States side to work. We don't know that either. And the quadrant thing, I think I brought that up a long time ago. That's a great idea, having a quadrants like regular beats for a police officer. Somebody can stay in that area for a time. They could switch after months or months go by and somebody takes a place. So they know, they're accustomed to seeing the people and the residents are accustomed to seeing code enforcement in the area, just like an officer that has a beat, you know, and they switch off after a while and they get to know the areas that they have to look for without even trying. They can drive to places and see if something's been improved, or they know the streets very well. If you mention the street, they know how to get there within a speedy amount of time. And I think that should be totally considered as part of the program that you're trying to indoctrinate. The city employees, and like I said, you know, what have they presently done to these people that are selling without a permit, health cards, just all the things that are proper that's in our code? How many of these people have been reprimanded or cited? And do we have any numbers? You know, all of us could go on and on, you know, because a lot of you guys, besides the police department, code enforcement's out there, but other people in the city, they're not out here like some of the rest of us that are either retired or we have jobs in the city. Mr. Casey, you know, he's pretty familiar with the area. And when you drive around, you see these things. So we're probably one of your best parts of finding things out is the citizens, but not enough of them speak up, and we all know that. But thank you for your time. I hope you consider some of the things that myself and the other few people here I have to say, and I'm really sorry for the citizens of Ceres that don't get involved, because when you don't, sometimes things take a long time to get fixed. And it's been a long time coming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next person, please.
Good evening, council members. John Warren, City of Ceres. Martin versus Boise, Idaho, was a case that, as we all know, kind of handcuffed code enforcement, law enforcement, and actually provided some direction as to part of our camping problem. But camping is camping. We have a time period where the people are allowed to move. Sleeping outside in a sleeping bag in a city park is one issue, but pulling up in your RV and gathering all the shopping carts in the neighborhood and filling them up with the garbage in the local trash cans and putting them by your vehicle and setting up camp is another thing altogether. And so RV camping really, I don't think, is addressed in Martin versus Boise, Idaho. That is more directed towards sleeping in parks. And going online and looking at the current interpretation of that particular case, it says the issue of shelters only arises if sleeping outdoors is banned in all places and all times. The opinion itself states that the regulating the place and time for sleeping outdoors may be well constitutional. It is often misinterpreted to say that no sleeping outdoors may be banned unless there are adequate shelters and alternatives. This is a popular misinterpretation of that particular case. So it bears us to follow the law, but also sometimes we can use the law to not enforce things that we should really be enforcing. Councilman Klein brought up the government outreach app. And I did reach out to him in regards to that because I have several cases that were opened on my cell phone and you can't get rid of them. And if we want the public to report and use the app and make it a good tool for us, then when something is adjudicated, the person that reported it needs to be able to delete it from their app. I brought the problem up to Captain Crane at one council meeting a while back, and he addressed it as best he could. And then, of course, I asked Mr. Klein about it, and then he approached city staff. But the previous app that the city was using prior to this one, you could delete things off of. You just swiped it off of, just like you swipe off a message or whatever, and it would go away. It may be retained in the city files or the government files as a case that they worked on, and they have a retention period for that particular issue. But at least the citizen out here could delete it off of their phone. If citizens can't get rid of this stuff, and when they care to use the app, it's just going to be a hindrance. The camera monitoring system would be a great asset. I think that was proven down here on Rose Avenue in our city. Haven't seen anything reappear there in quite a long time. And I'm sure that's because the camera was there, and quite possibly somebody living nearby was reprimanded for doing what they were doing. Street vendors, the people that are dropping these folks off own these small stands. I don't think the person or the vendor that is selling the product is the owner of that particular little cart. Councilman Casey most recently saw someone dropping off a person in front of CVS drugstore, which is a common spot. And And that person had 3 or 4 carts in his pickup truck and a trailer. So it's fairly obvious that probably the vendor, the person doing the selling, who's in violation, but they don't own the product. So I think if code enforcement came along and seized that property as evidence of the violation, where it could be returned to the property owner if he produced himself at the police station or wherever it was stored, might be a approach to getting that type of activity. Run out of time. Can I have a few more minutes?
How many more questions do you have?
Well, I just wanted to touch on.
Go ahead. Should be fine. Go ahead.
The work schedule.
Go ahead.
410, your Fridays, basically, there's no code enforcement. Then you have somebody on Saturday and nobody on Sunday. I think that a 7-day-a-week coverage pilot program going into this thing until you can get a really good handle on it might be a better approach, because the people such as the guy that was dropping the vendor off in front of CVS, they know the city schedule and they understand it, and they're going to appear here when they know our local law enforcement people aren't going to be contacting them. And so if we have a 7-day-a-week coverage program, that would probably curtail that problem. And then, of course, on the weekends, you always have other issues to deal with, such as garage sales and things like that, that are not as much of a priority, but yet they are out there. And then, of course, the aesthetics of the city, garbage cans or waste wheelers. I know that's way down on the list, but I believe that's been moved over to Public Works, and they have a system available to address that. So maybe that's something that code enforcement isn't involved with, but Public Works can take a more aggressive approach, and that being out there would help the aesthetics of the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other members sitting in the dais that would like to speak? Welcome.
My name's Paula. So I had a couple different comments. I'm going to start with procedures, the way things are being handled in regards to the different notices and the way citations and the time frame is being addressed. So I'm a little confused because normally when you issue a notice of violation, you give 10 days, you go out there. If they're still in violation, you issue an admin cite. You go out there another 10 days, you can issue another admin cite. At any point, you can go to a notice and order. Once you go to a notice and order, you don't issue admin cites. And that's what was in Chief Collins's layout. Once you go to a notice and order, you give them X amount of days to come into compliance, be it 10 days, 30 days. And then after that, if they're not in compliance, you start assessing daily penalties in the amount of anywhere from 100, depending on how the code is written, 100 up to $1,000 per day. And then you take them to a civil penalties hearing and you ask for that money for a hearing officer. That takes care of some of the cases that are being dragged out for over a year. When there shouldn't be an issue for them to be dragged out that long, when they can be assessed as civil penalties. Then if they don't pay the civil penalties within whatever time frame is set up, say 30 days, then they get late penalties and it gets attached to their property taxes. Generally, that's the fastest way to get somebody to come into compliance, in particular when there is health and safety code violations, but it could be for a vacant parcel with, overgrown vegetation and the property owner just doesn't want to mow it. So that was one. Let's see. You mentioned like the illegal dumps and given 10 days, like a notice of violation. You don't normally have to give a notice of violation if it's in the public right of way. You can, or you can give a notice, say 3 days, that gives them time to remove it. And I'm talking about illegal dumps where it's put out by the property owner without, say, scheduling a bulky item pickup, not something that somebody dumped where you have to investigate who did it by, looking for mail and that type of thing. That helps to get it off. And then if they don't clean it up within the time frame, city picks it up and you charge them for all the fees incurred by the city for, since the start of the case to the cost of the dump fees. Mentioned vendors, like the one, I think it was Klein that mentioned the one at Whitmore and Faith Home. So if the property owner is renting that space to the vendor, the city could actually address it by going after the vendor for not having, if they don't have the proper permits from the state. If it's like fruit or something, you have to have it, from the Ag Commission. Of course, the business license from the city, so you can address that with the vendor and the property owner. It could be zoning that they're in violation of, because that property is probably not zoned for that type of activity. So just some suggestions. Oh, I was going to ask on the homeless issues on private property, it was mentioned to have the property owners post the no trespass signs, but are they also being backed up by a 602 letter? That's a question. Because that kind of helps the situation. Because even if they're homeless, there's a difference between private property versus public property, and private property, you can go after the property owner if they're not making sure the property is being cleaned up. By allowing camping, if that's in the ordinance on private property, or at the very least, the junk and debris that's left at the homeless site, they can address it that way to get the property owner to remove the folks. Let's see. Oh, it was mentioned, I believe it was Captain Crane mentioned the cases as far as being, the citations being, oh.
You may continue. Go ahead.
Can I finish this quick
Yes, you
thought?
may.
Or?
Yes.
Okay. The citations being only good up for a year. Well, you don't close your case until your case it's abated. As far as activity, if you issued an admin site, let's say for junk and debris in a front yard in March, and you close your case and you get another complaint and you go back in, let's say April, or let's get that a little bit longer, so let's say May or June, you can reopen your case. You can go up to 1 year from the last activity in your case and reopen that case if it's for the same violations. If it's something different, then you would have to start fresh. But there's no timeline as far as an annual thing where you stop issuing citations. You go until the case is complete. So I was kind of confused on that one. And I have some other things, but I know I'm out of time.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Any other members in the public? Okay, seeing none. Anybody on Zoom?
Mayor, we do have Rosalinda Vieira, who has her hand up, and let's allow her to speak.
You guys ready? Okay, I'm going to try to make it very quick. I'm just going to kind of concur with everything that's already been said, so I don't think I really need to say anything. One of the things I did question about were the numbers, because I was wondering how many were duplicated versus unduplicated incidents that are being called in. As Councilman Casey had mentioned that there was an issue he had seen for quite a while. I think he said a year. So I'm wondering how many complaints of those 97 example for each month that you were getting were possibly that same incident called by several people about the same incident. Because maybe that could, with the additional hiring or law code enforcement, could actually bring those numbers down if we're actually responding and have the manpower to respond a little faster. As for the days and hours, again, like he said, to leave it in the powers that be that know the situation best. I do think, though, during the summer, we have longer days, so I can see the 10 hours being realistic. But during the wintertime, there's only so much you can do during the day, and it's 8 to 5. I can see being more realistic because of the daylight hours, especially when it comes to doing certain situations that need to be done during the day. And then lastly, I'm just going to touch, or the 7 days a week, I do think is important, especially starting off. But I like the idea regarding the beats or quadrants, which were mentioned by several people as well as Klein, about the community, getting them involved. Because I think if I saw my code enforcement person out here like every week and driving by, I'd probably start waving and talking to him and maybe finding ways that I could also get involved and maybe helping out my own community. Like, I don't want to say community policing, but kind of community involving, helping community itself, knowing what all the ordinances are, because I think someone had mentioned how thick that book is in the past. And there's no way I'm going to be able to get all of those questions and memorize all those ordinances. But if I had a quick person I knew was going to drive by every Saturday and I might see him at the park and I can just run across the street and say, hey, can I do this or can I do that? That would be really nice. And if I can get to know somebody that I could quickly ask without having to book a appointment with the chief. But I think that was my main questions that I had. I appreciate your time. I'm so glad we had this meeting and I look forward to the rest of the meeting. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Do we have anybody else on Zoom?
There is no one else wishing to speak.
Okay, and I want to bring this back to Chief. Is there any questions that were left unanswered for you that you wanted direction from the council?
Yeah, what is the direction? What is the will of the council from after hearing the presentation and the community input? What is the will of the council?
So can you just go back to the actual questions that you have so we can go through them one at a time? There's only a couple, right?
One question that comes to mind is we are compliance driven, compliance minded. Do we need to shift into more of an enforcement, or do we leave that discretion to the code enforcement officers who are doing the work?
My personal opinion, I think officer discretion is important, especially when they'll know when we need to act and when we need to investigate further. That's my approach. Council?
I believe since this program process is new, we should stay with our enforcement like it's been, code enforcement, et cetera, and see how it goes for 6 or 8 months, then make this decision on whether we need to be more actively involved with enforcement from the sworn.
I'm just jotting down some notes, so I'm not ignoring you guys.
Yeah, Mayor and Chief, if I might, I mean, just from what I understand is the process, generally we're trying to work with folks who may have a code enforcement issue, provide, it's a compliance educational effort to work with residents to get them into compliance. But at the same time, we're not afraid to write notices of violation and write citations. But I think at least out of the gate, we're interested in working with folks, creating a relationship with them with the end goal, having them comply with the municipal code and, address whatever issue it is. And I think what we're looking for is that the approach we want to continue to take. And I think that would be our recommended approach at this point.
Councilmember Casey and Councilmember Klein, any comments on that? Just to offer direction.
I think currently we have to leave it up to code enforcement to be active in what the citizens are looking for as far as compliance. And they also have to be in consideration of notification of the violators. So, I think we need to leave it up to staff currently. Since we do have 2 code enforcement officers, I think that we need to, have that open dialogue with them and Lieutenant Perry before we start changing the wheel but we need to get this wheel going in the right direction. So, I think as we progress with what we're doing here, I think we can progress, with what needs to be done. So I can't see actively just flat out making a bunch of changes, but I think we need to get a grasp on everything. So I think we have to leave it up to, Lieutenant Perry to guide them to what needs to be done.
Thank you. Councilmember Casey?
Sure. One of the issues that came up here is illegal branch dumps, leaf and dump, whatever. Part of the problem, I think, with that issue is the communication with the city. Even this meeting that we're having today, I wonder how many of the general public knew that we were going to have this code enforcement hearing. But in my neighborhood, I've walked it a little bit. We have some vehicles that have been there for a long time. We have some people doing things, and I warned them. I said, we're going to have this meeting. We're going to start really beefing up our enforcement. But some of the illegal dumping is being done by the general public. They don't know that it's illegal. And I think somehow or another we need to educate them. But at the same time, I think probably, as mentioned earlier, some of the citations or warnings are repeat offenders. There are people that know that they can get away with the things that go on. Well, I mentioned earlier about the property, the branches across the street from where I work. That wasn't a neighborhood. I mean, that wasn't something from the neighborhood here. Somebody brought it here and dumped it during the night out of their trailer or whatever. So I think that first, the general public needs to be aware of what they can and can't do. And I think you really need to crack down right away on those people that are repeat offenders. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Chief, your next question that you may have as far as direction?
I heard several people from the public that were in favor of moving to a beat system for the code enforcement officers. So what is the will of the council?
That sounds like a good idea. You said you have 6, right? Well, the idea would be how many?
Well, if we are allotted the proposal that we presented tonight, we would have 4 total working code enforcement officers, one of them being a supervisor. So we would have 4 beats.
4 beats, okay. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm okay with the 4 beats. Council?
I'm also okay with the 4 beats. Would they rotate, Chief, or would the same person be responsible for that particular section for a period of time?
They would be responsible for that for a period of time, and much like our patrol officers, they rotate beats. So that's something that we can look into as well. I'd like for the unit to have some input into what they're going to do.
Thank you. Councilmember Klein? Klein, can you please unmute your mic, sir?
There we go. I thought I did. Sorry. Currently I'm not in favor of a working supervisor. If we put a 3rd code enforcement officer on, then I would say, we'd have 3 different beats and, on a rotating basis. I'm in favor of, 5/8, 7 days a week. I know that's going to be his next question. So that's where I stand.
Okay, Council Member or Vice Mayor Silvera, what are your thoughts on the beat system?
Even your presentation, you said that you would support a beat system, and therefore so would I.
Okay, let's move on to work schedule. Well, before we move on to that, I have Council Member Klein's opinion on the working supervisor. I need direction from the other 3 council members on your thoughts on that. And I will tell you, in my personal opinion, there needs to be a supervisor in the unit to deal with the day-to-day stuff that goes on. We've had a sworn sergeant oversee the unit. That was Sergeant Coley. For some time before that, it was Sergeant Wren, and it just doesn't work. But there needs to be day-to-day supervision within the unit, somebody who has extensive code enforcement knowledge and experience to be embedded into the unit if we're going to make this thing a success. That's just my opinion, and that would be my recommendation.
Chief, I would support a supervisor if within the next couple of months we receive some data that it is being effective, and that's I would support it in that manner. So I say yes to that. Is that clear? Does that make sense? I say I will support the supervisor position, but I would like to see some information 6 months out to see how well that is working.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes.
Councilmember Casey.
I follow your lead there, Mayor. Yeah, I support it, but we need, Alex mentioned earlier, and we're all aware that this is a big problem, and it didn't happen overnight. And you know, I know we can't expect it to be corrected by the 1st of July either. But I do think that we as a council have an obligation to the citizens to ask Chief for updates to show that there is definite improvement. Okay, so I support the supervisor.
And just to reiterate, Vice Mayor.
Yeah, having a working supervisor would give us 4 working people in code enforcement on the street, which is what we decided when we targeted that ARPA money towards this. So that seems like a decision we had already made. I believe having 4 also gives us the ability to have 4 smaller beats if we're going to go to a beat system, which makes it more effective for each one.
Thank you very much.
So may I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, sir.
So if you have a working supervisor and 3 code enforcement officers, who does the working supervisor report to?
The captain or the lieutenant.
Okay. And I think that, you know, for the intern, for me, and the reason why is I think the captain or the lieutenant needs to be up to speed on what the expectations are before we had a working supervisor. So I still stand by, you know, where I'm at, and it's 3 to 1. It's 3 to 1.
Thank you, Councilmember Klein.
Mayor, may I say a few words?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Just as it relates to that, Councilmember Klein. Yeah, Captain Crane and myself are certainly trying to manage the code enforcement unit as best as possible. However, it is not the same as being a working supervisor out there. You know, we also manage several other aspects of the department as well. So our time gets pulled in a lot of different directions throughout the day. You know, that working supervisor position would be very important. And then, of course, key issues that are raised throughout that position can be brought to myself or Captain Crane. And then we can address those issues a little further, or issues that need further attention may be brought back to council or whatnot. Those would be our roles. Or again, where we have to provide certain direction back down to the supervisor and to the officers or whatnot. But our roles at this time are not the same as an actual working supervisor. Therefore, as Chief Collins is stating, that position is very crucial to the success of the code enforcement division.
Thank you very much. Chief, you have a couple more?
Councilmember Klein was in favor of looking at lowering the insurance requirement for street vendors. I'm looking for direction from the rest of the council members on that.
Do we have any these phones going on? Do we have any information on what that would look like, or is this the direction for you to look into it?
It's direction to look into it.
I will just say that that's a good thing. We'll look into it to make sure that, like Councilmember Klein said, that, you know, there's no liability when it comes to that. Go ahead and Casey.
One second, okay.
There you go.
Yes. So you're going to look into what a street vendor's liability insurance is?
It's currently set at $2 million, if I'm speaking correctly. One of the ideas to maybe entice them to comply with our requirements is lowering that to about $1 million.
Okay, well, I wouldn't be in favor of that. $2 million is was a lot of money when we were in grade school, but $2 million is not much now. And since we are lax on enforcing street vendors, and if something was to occur that a street vendor did something inappropriate, $2 million adds up pretty quick. So I wouldn't be in favor of lowering the requirement.
Thank you very much, Casey. Vice Mayor Silvera.
Yeah, first of all, there's no facts behind this, but I don't see changing it from 2 million to $1 million is going to move the needle at all and make these street vendors all of a sudden get insurance and permits. Don't see that happening at all. But if you're going to look into it, I support that.
And the final thing that I have on my notes is the work schedule itself. What is the will of the council?
I'll start off. So if you're saying that if we stay with 410s, does that mean that at some point there still is going to be a code enforcement officer working on the weekends? Would that be adjusted?
We have the current model we have somebody working on Saturdays. I don't have a model that has a 410 planned into Sundays. I can put that together. But the current model working, I know there's some interest for them to be on Sundays. I don't necessarily believe that, but I'm not the council either. And I take direction from the city manager who gets direction from the council.
Okay, so 7 days a week is the other option, right?
Yeah, 5/8, 7 days a week.
Okay, but that would also fluctuate, correct? That would be somebody would work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and somebody would work.
Yeah, it would be a staggered 5/8 schedule where there would be coverages on the weekends and we would rotate that every 3 or 4 months.
There's no way to stagger the 410s? Is that just not doable?
It can be staggered.
Because I mean, I kind of would like to see an approach of 410s, but also cover Sundays.
I'm a fan of the 410 schedule because it allows flexibility. It's a benefit to the employee working that schedule and it doesn't cost any money. They do like the flexibilities of that. That is something that we can offer to our employees, but it's the will of the council.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move to Councilmember Casey.
410s, 8/5s doesn't make any difference as long as we're covering it. I think initially, Chief, I think we need to cover Sundays. Once we get everything under control, maybe we don't have to do Sundays. I know where I work, it's difficult to have people work Sundays, but if you lay out the plan, it's a necessary evil to correct the problems that we have, I believe. It doesn't matter to me if it's 410s, 8/5s, but I think we need to have 7 days a week.
So it sounds like Sundays for sure, but it doesn't matter 410s or 5, correct, Casey?
Correct.
Okay. Move on to Councilmember Casey. Klein.
I said I wanted 5/8, 7 days a week, but I can go with 410s, but 7 days a week coverage.
Okay, I can put together a couple different models of rotating 410s for weekend coverage to include Sundays and submit that to the city manager with the pros and cons of that model and move forward with that. And I'm a proponent of the 410. I think it's a benefit that we can provide our employees as long as the work gets done.
Sounds good. Vice Mayor, did you already have your input on this? Just want to make sure they want to skip you.
Did not. I have no experience in scheduling, nor would I pretend to. So I believe that's something that Chief Collins, Lieutenant Perry, and Captain Crane should take care of. I don't know that anybody on this, in this Zoom, besides those guys, understand how that would work. So I totally am good with whatever they decide.
Chief, do you kind of have like a clarification of what like you just said? You'll go ahead and bring that back to us and see what.
Yes, I have clear direction, and I'll turn it over to the city manager in case I miss something.
Okay, Alex.
I think that was very helpful. Thanks, Chief, for kind of guiding us through that part of the conversation. So the other thing we will build into the program is regular updates to the council. I think in order to be successful, we need to maintain this level of communication with you as the council and the community. So we will definitely build in regular updates to the council and to the community regarding the program. So just wanted to add that. Chief, thoughts on next steps? Where do you, what would our next step be in regard to development of the ARPA funded program and the council's input or direction?
The next steps would be to finalize a plan with the council's input and direction and submit that, bring it to council with a resolution for approval.
Okay, sounds good. Is everybody good?
Yeah, Mayor, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Alex, the fire department was not going to be part of this, aren't they part of the solution of code enforcement? There's nobody from the fire department here?
Fire department definitely has involvement in code enforcement as it relates to weed abatement, as it relates to unsafe building structures. And yes, we do work cross-departmentally with departments, which is why you see Public Works, Christopher with the planning folks. And you were absolutely right, Council Member. Fire is an important part of the program as well.
So we just didn't invite them to be part of it?
You know, I don't recall if I wrote an invitation to the fire chief, so I apologize.
And then maybe hopefully when we do bring this back, that we'll have them to answer any other questions that we may have.
If there are questions for fire, we can certainly jot them down at this point, and make sure we get back to the council.
That'd be great. Thank you, Casey. So if there's no more questions, I think we are done. No more questions? Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. This meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.